Welcome back to True Crime. I am your host, Andy Hale. I'm back now with my sidekick, David Rose. I feel like this should be the Andy and David podcast because we did 3 knock your socks off episodes about the Carlton Gary case. We're going to talk about a different case today. For those of you who don't remember, David Rose is investigations editor of Unheard. He's previously worked for national and international media organizations, including The Guardian, Observer, Vanity Fair, BBC TV. Long been involved in investigating miscarriages of justice, which is what I love about him. Won numerous awards, written numerous books. Welcome back to True Crime.
My pleasure.
I'm still blown away by the Carlton Gary episodes that we didn't release these yet, but I listened to them. Oh my God. I'm still just blown away by that. We're going to have more to talk about with that. But today we're going to talk about another case that is I don't know what the right words are to describe it. The Lucy Letby case. Did I pronounce her last name right?
You did.
This just got on my radar screen recently from a woman that I work with who mentioned it to me. And she said, "Have you heard about the case?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And then I brought it up with you last time. And since this is a British case, I knew that you would be involved in it. So let's get into it. Tell me who Lucy Letby, who is she? And let's start at the beginning.
Well, Lucy Letby had a great vocation to be a nurse. She was born and raised in a small town in the border country between Wales and England. She led a pretty quiet life. She qualified as a nurse. And eventually she came to work in the neonatal unit for sick premature babies at a hospital in Chester, which is just inside England, again, on that Welsh-English border country. And the unit was what was called a level 2 unit, which means it couldn't offer the kind of really advanced intensive care that a so-called level 3 unit can. But it had some very sick, very small babies in there who might have been born, say, at 25 weeks, who might only weigh a pound and a half. Mm. And so those were most of the babies that were coming through that unit. Now, she worked there for several years. And then in 2015 to 2016, over a period of just over a year, the number of babies dying in that unit, or shortly after leaving it, shot up. Typically in the past, there had been 1 or 2 children who would lose their lives a year. Suddenly, in this period, I believe the total was 16 passed away. And some of them, it was believed, unexpectedly. So that was the beginning of the serious investigations that eventually would lead to Lucy Letby not fulfilling her vocation as a nurse, but serving life without parole.
Oh my goodness. So these babies were dying in 2015 to 2016. And how does Lucy Letby become the focus of the investigation? How does that play out?
Well, it seems to have begun with conversations among some of the doctors. And they believed that there was an uncanny coincidence, or maybe not a coincidence, that as attention began to be focused on the unit because of this sudden spike in the death rate, they began to have conversations that suggested that she had been present either when babies died unexpectedly or when they suffered unexpected sudden collapses, having apparently been stable. And eventually, with the unit coming under a lot of scrutiny from the sort of national bodies that are supposed to ensure quality care in Britain, they took their concerns to the management of the hospital, and they had Lucy Letby suspended from frontline duties in the fall of 2016. She took this very badly. She, to all intents and purposes, to all appearances, she was an exceptionally dedicated nurse. And if there was a reason why she had been present on occasions when babies collapsed or died unexpectedly. It may simply have been that she was actually at work more often than any other nurse, because she would volunteer to do overtime shifts. She was trying to save up money to buy herself a house. She was in her early 30s, and then she was in her 20s. I'm sorry, she's in her early 30s now. So she was quite dedicated. So, just from the law of averages, if she's at work more often than other nurses, then she's going to be around more often. But in any case, so she protested at this kind of suspension from frontline duty, and she took out a grievance against the doctors, against the demotion that she had been awarded, and she won. In the spring of 2017, she was told that she could go back to frontline work, and that she had been unfairly treated. Now, the matter might well have rested there, but the doctors were determined that this wasn't sufficient. They had come to believe that Lucy Letby was not a dedicated nurse, but a cold-blooded serial killer. And they wanted to get the police to investigate, and they put pressure on the hospital management, and they applied direct pressure themselves to get the cops involved. Now, I have got in my possession documents that have only just very recently emerged. Bizarrely, they were sent to the defense just in the autumn of 2024, which reveal that these doctors were having conversations on email about how, as one put it, we can pique the interest of the police. There had been a meeting in early May 2017. Again, details of this have only just emerged, between the leadership of the hospital, the chief executive and a couple of other senior officials, with the police, in which the police had made it plain that they were quite reluctant to investigate this. They were not satisfied there was any direct evidence of Lucy Letby harming children. And they were showing themselves, as I say, quite reluctant to launch a full-blown police inquiry. At this point, these doctors start exchanging these emails, and then they decide to write a report themselves to the police. And amazingly enough, I've got versions of this document which go through a couple of iterations, and you see track change recommendations. Oh, let's put this in. Let's suggest that this baby was deliberately injected with air, and they were kind of pushing the police. Eventually, they had another meeting with the police, and they got their way. The police launched what was called Operation Hummingbird, a criminal investigation into the deaths at the hospital. What
year was Operation Hummingbird launched?
It was launched in 2017.
So the way I understand it, these babies started dying in a higher frequency between 2015 and 2016.
Mm-hmm.
How long had Lucy Letby worked at this hospital prior to that?
Well, more than 3 years.
More than 3 years?
More than 3 years. She'd started working on this unit in January 2012, and the babies did not start dying until the summer of 2015.
That's a huge fact to me that cuts in her favor. That she had been there 3 years, and if the allegations are that she's this baby killer, she waited 3 years until she morphed into this, which is kind of weird. It's not like she's this new employee who showed up and all of a sudden we've got all kinds of, nefarious things going on. So she's been there 3 years when this starts happening. When you talked about the doctors wanting to pique the interest of the police, by that, did you mean get them interested enough to investigate?
Exactly that.
Is there any reason that I don't understand why she became the focus. So she's present in the hospital. I mean, the doctors are too, aren't they?
Well, of course they are. I'll just read you from one of these documents, which this is a scoop for you because this has not yet been published in the UK.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah. So one of the doctors is called Ravi Jayaram. And I think Ravi Jayaram's actions in this case perhaps are as questionable as anybody's, because he became one of Lucy Letby's principal accusers. He testified against her. He was instrumental in trying to get the police to investigate. And so here he's writing to his colleague, who's another attending physician, as you would say, consultant doctor, as we would say. Suggestion for discussion. should we highlight explicitly the cases that Lucy Letby was in attendance and in close proximity to the incubators when we know for a fact she was? This is, after all, the basis of our concerns, and I think for the police to have their interest piqued, we need to have that with all the cases. And he goes on in this vein, and then he recommends changes to the initial draft of this document, which would actually make allegations that were highly contentious. So at one point, he suggests that one of the children who died had developed blotchy skin. And he says, well, let's add, this is consistent with deliberately administered air embolism. In other words, an injection of air into the bloodstream, which of course will then go to the brain and potentially cause death. And at this point, that's not in any pathological report. There's no independent evidence that this was the case, that this was why the baby had died. And yet there he is making that kind of recommendation. And he's discussing it first on the series of emails. And then this document is sent to the police. It's right here.
What is it?
It's from the doctors to the police, and it says reasons for concerns regarding a possible criminal cause for increased neonatal mortality at the Countess of Chester Hospital, June 2015 to July 2016. And he goes through these cases, and it's been kind of souped up in this way to make it more accusatory.
What I don't understand is the doctors are now making these allegations against Lucy Letby. Had there been prior to the doctors doing that, hadn't there been some kind of medical forensic analysis to try to determine why these little babies died? I mean, had there been any indication that, because these babies, just I think what you said was, these are babies that are already in unfortunate shape in this unit,
Yeah,
right? They're
absolutely.
bound, they're having serious problems.
Yeah.
So had there been any forensic analysis of these babies to see if it even was, is it something that happened naturally, or was it something, was there some kind of intentional conduct? Did the hospital do anything like that?
No. Worse than that.
Wait, hold on. I mean, how can it be?
I'm
How can it be no? I mean,
I'm
how
just
can
finding another document.
How can the answer be no?
Okay, so
I don't understand.
In
that.
most cases, these babies, if not all, had been given post-mortem autopsies, and the local coroner had considered the cases, and again, another recently emerging document has been the notes that the coroner's administrative staff had on the reasons why these babies died. And what we find from these documents is that children who were later said to have been murdered, their cause of death was put down to totally different reasons. Simply just being premature, in some cases infection, in other cases, other serious problems. So, there had been a whole bunch of in terms of actual analysis of why they died, there was nothing until the numbers rose and the doctors started putting their heads together that suggested that any of this was deliberate.
Well, this. Hold on. I mean, this. Oh my gosh! Whenever I seem to get in these podcasts with you, my head wants to explode because you have these crazy stories. I don't understand how the doctors can be pointing the finger at one of their nurses when there hasn't even been any kind of medical / forensic analysis to determine if these babies died through intentional conduct of somebody like Lucy Letby. I mean, how can you start accusing her when you don't even know if all these babies just, died for medical reasons because of what poor shape they were in?
Well, I think there are two possible answers to this question. The first answer is because the statistics showed this spike in mortality, the hospital was coming under a great deal of pressure There were calls to have inquiries. Indeed, the Royal College of Paediatricians did conduct an inquiry. These doctors felt that their unit might just be closed or clearly cast in bad odor. In fact, what happened, it was downgraded. It stopped being what's called a level 2 unit. It became a level 1 unit, which meant it was no longer handling such sick babies. So, professionally, as being part of a unit which had this record, they were under some pressure to find a cause that, if you like, got them off the hook. Now, there were other things happening which were not their fault at all. There was a tremendous shortage of resources because the hospital was not doing well financially, although it's part of the National Health Service. The labyrinthine, complex system of financing hospitals in England is another whole subject. But the long and the short of it is that they were under financial pressure at this hospital. They'd had to let experienced staff go from this neonatal unit. I've spoken to a very senior nurse practitioner who worked there for years and had to go because there wasn't any longer money to fund her job. And obviously, if you get rid of staff and you get rid of skilled staff, you're exposing the children in that unit to potential risk. So that there's all that web of things. But I think there's something worse happening too. I think one or two of these doctors who became Letby's accusers and really got this sort of campaign against her going, first to have her suspended, but then eventually criminally investigated. I think they had, well, I can't say this was their motive, but what has emerged recently is evidence that maybe we should come back to about what one might say was negligence or very poor care, which was their own responsibility. They had made clinical errors that in themselves had likely contributed to the deaths of children.
Are the police even equipped to medically investigate this issue? I mean, you get the police involved. This seems like such a complex, potentially complex medical issue in terms of how these babies died. You have to go back and figure that out. It seems, I don't even know if you can do it. So the police get called in. What do they do? How do they go about doing anything, and are they qualified to do it?
Well, the short answer, of course, is no, they're not. How can any regular detective be expected to have the high degree of medical knowledge that you would need?
It's laughable, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's laughable.
Well, I'll tell you what happened, because it is in itself an extraordinary story. A man called Dowi Evans, who was a retired paediatrician from South Wales, got in touch with the police. He wrote to an old colleague who worked for the National Crime Agency, which is the equivalent of the FBI in Britain, who passed him on to the Cheshire police, who were investigating these cases soon after the start of Operation Hummingbird. And he basically wrote an email, and it said, "This sounds like my kind of case. I could help you with this. I'm volunteering my services." And the cops said, "Yeah, that would be great."
And who is this guy?
He's called Dowi Evans.
Dowi Evans. He sounds like a character on one of these British crime shows. My wife loves all these British crime shows. It's like,
I mean, when the guy writes this email, he hadn't practiced medicine for years. He was in his mid-70s.
Sounds like the perfect guy we want on the case.
Yeah. But he had been an expert witness in many cases. He had kind of basically...
Well, let me pause you there. I've used this line in a lot of my closing arguments in cases where the other side is an expert witness. I quote Mark Twain on this. Mark Twain says an expert witness is just some guy from out of town.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's exactly what he was.
Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. Okay.
Yeah.
I've used plenty that are amazing, and I've seen plenty who are not. So this guy emerges and injects himself like, "Hey, I can help." Okay. So then what happens?
They say, "Oh, well, that'd be great. Come and see us." So he goes to see the police in the summer of 2017. And they show him, he says, "Show me a sample case notes. Show me the medical notes of one of these children." So they show him one set of notes, the notes that belong to a child that has been referred to throughout the whole proceedings as Baby O. And he looks at the Baby O results, and he has said himself in another podcast done by a British journalist, he said that within 10 minutes, he was certain that this child had been murdered. Now,
Okay. Okay. Well,
it's an amazing thing.
whenever I hear certain,
Yeah.
it reminds me of my Chester Uyghur Starved Rock murders case. It was similar language used when the state's attorney was at the crime scene and just happened to see a log with a little bit of blood on it. And he was certain that that was the murder weapon. Okay. So whenever I hear certain, that's when the red flags go off, and it's like, it's the opposite, you know?
Yeah.
So this guy says this, he's got this 10-minute diagnosis. He's certain this is murder. Okay. Then what?
Well, then what happens is that the police give him a pile of cases. They give him the cases of 28 babies who were in the unit in this period, some of which led to death, some of which involved unforeseen, unexpected collapses. And he takes them away and he looks at them for several months. And he eventually comes back in October 2017. He has a 2-day meeting with the police. And he says, well, yeah, I think, there is a serial killer on the loose here. And he identifies a bunch of cases that he thinks are evidence of foul play. And that, is the basis for what then becomes an enormous police investigation with, at one time, over 100 police officers assigned to it.
Well, when he says serial killer, is he confining himself? Is he talking about the potential that it could be somebody outside the hospital?
No, I think he was very much of the view it's somebody in the hospital. He thinks it's somebody who has access to these children through their work.
Okay, and let me pause you again. I'm sorry. Tell me this guy's name again?
Dowi Evans.
Dowi Evans. I always talk about you and I being screenwriters. So, if we're writing our screenplay, Dowi Evans sounds like a great character name that we would come up with. Is he in any way connected personally or professionally with this hospital or any of the doctors who work there? Is there any kind of a bias factored in?
As far as I'm aware, no. I don't think that has been alleged at any point. I think he wanted the work. He wanted fame and notoriety. I mean, by this stage, of course, this has become a big national news story.
Is he paid? Is he compensated for this?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And exactly how much he's got paid is not being disclosed.
Is he the only medical person that the police that are consulting with? Is it just Dowi Evans?
No. So he writes all these initial reports, and then they bring in other doctors to so-called peer review him. There are two in particular. There's a doctor called Sandy Bohin, and there's another guy called Professor Hindmarsh. And eventually they all testify for the state, for the prosecution in the trial.
At a criminal trial.
At a criminal trial. But what is amazing is that, I don't know if this is the case in the United States, but in the UK, if you are part of an investigation, and quite clearly he was, I mean, he was helping to direct this police investigation. As we already said, the police had no expertise. The police couldn't say whether this was criminal or otherwise behavior. But although he was, so intimately involved in the investigation, he nevertheless became the most important prosecution witness. Now, the rules, as I say, governing expert witnesses in the UK supposedly say, okay, an expert witness has to be independent. It can't be somebody who has actually played a part in the investigation. But in this case, the man who became the most important witness, and by far the most important expert witness, had been an integral part of the police investigation.
So at this point then, you said at some point over 100 officers get involved in the investigation.
Yeah.
How long does this go on for, and what do they do?
Years.
Years?
Well, I mean, they comb through medical records. They get other experts. They seize all Lucy Letby's diaries and journals and letters and computer and all the rest of it. They bring in psychological profilers. They do all this. I mean, they assemble this vast edifice. But the case, as they put it together, has one very large problem. Nobody has ever seen Lucy Letby commit any harmful act against a baby. Nobody has seen her do anything that would damage a baby's health. The only basis of the prosecution case is that she was there when seven babies who died either caused their death straight away or She had been there shortly before they died, or in a further 7 cases, she had attempted to murder another 7 children by doing things that in the end they survived, but nevertheless caused their health to collapse unexpectedly. So the statistical argument becomes central. How could one person have been there for all these different ill occurrences?
I want to make sure I understand the chronology. The investigation, the full-blown investigation that's focusing on Lucy Letby, begins in what year?
2017.
2017. And she gets charged with murder when?
Okay, so she's first arrested in July of 2018, and she's questioned, but she's released. She's arrested again in June 2019, a whole year later.
Wow.
And then again, she's let go. And then finally, in November 2020, so that's more than 3 years after the police investigation began, she was arrested again. And this time she was charged with 7 murders. Well, she was actually initially charged with 8 murders and 7 attempted murders.
Wow. This is an incredible case because, if she did it, it's just horrific. If she did it, it's just an absolutely horrific thing. If she didn't, it's horrific, absolutely horrific thing. 3 years later, she's arrested and charged with murder. So during those 3 years of the investigation, from what you can tell and what's been reported, was there ever any other suspect or theory, or was it more like we're just kind of going down the Lucy Letby path?
They never investigated anybody else. There was no sign that they even entertained the possibility that anyone else could have been involved. But at the same time, it seems that from a pretty early stage, literally from when Dowi Evans had said, "Oh, I know that this child was murdered," when he saw the first notes of baby O, they were sure they had a murder case. And of course, Letby herself was going through hell. I mean, here she was, this nurse for whom, there's no question, caring for children was a vocation. And she was recording her thoughts in anguished notes and diaries, which then became part of the case against her. No one had seen her commit a harmful act against the child, but she had written notes that I think should be read.
Why is that used against her? It seems like it would help.
Well, so at one point she's under enormous pressure. She, psychologically she's in pieces, and she writes a note which says something like, "I did this, I am evil." But then in the same note, that got quoted everywhere in the media, as you'd expect. In the same note, she says, "The police are trying to make me admit that I did this. I didn't do it. They're putting me under such pressure." So, I mean, she's being bullied. I mean, so, it's like they were trying to make her confess. She never did anything approaching.
She never confessed, though, correct?
No.
Wow. So does she winds up going and having a criminal trial. Who represented her? Does she have a private lawyer, or does she have like an appointed lawyer?
Well, in the UK, any case like this, you're pretty much bound to have an appointed lawyer. I mean, it's not quite like in the United States. The court doesn't choose who represents you. But I think what happened here was actually tragic. So obviously this was an immense case of enormous complexity, embracing a vast amount of highly technical medical evidence. So what her parents did, they went to basically their local solicitor. That is what we call, the lawyer who doesn't, not the trial lawyer, but the lawyer who does the preparatory work. And, I'm sure he was a very well-meaning guy, but he didn't have experience of a vast, complex case of this scale. And, it's unsurprising that he didn't maybe do as an effective a job.
Well, the reason I ask is, I mean, let's just use the famous case in the United States, the O.J. Simpson case.
Yes.
He's charged with murdering, his ex-wife. The stakes are high, obviously, right? It's a murder case. Right. The Lucy Letby stakes are the stakes are even higher.
Yeah.
O.J. Simpson has the means to hire a team of lawyers. Johnny Cochran, Shapiro. He's got experts. He's got Dershowitz. He's got Barry Scheck. He's got the Innocence Project. He's got a whole host of things. And that's just a murder case. Okay, that's just a murder case. You've got this complex medical issue with these these infants that are already in poor care. It's a micro expertise. I mean, it's a such a niche little area that there's no way a lawyer could be equipped to do that on his own without an enormous amount of resources, without an enormous team, and a lawyer who's just experienced handling that kind of a case. And so it just breaks my heart to think that she didn't get afforded the kind of legal team she needed to muster a robust defense. And I'm sure this person did, the best they could. But this is such a case that cries out for expertise. It's just incredible. I had a random question. I'm looking at my notes. Why Operation Hummingbird? How did that come about?
It's a very curious thing. So the police in this country, they choose operation names randomly. And so they run it through the computer, chooses an operation name, and it became Hummingbird. I don't know why. There's no reason.
Okay.
Just random.
All right.
Literally. But I should say, as well as the solicitor, so you have in Britain a two-stage legal representation. You have your solicitor, and then you have your trial lawyer, barrister. Usually, in a case like this, there'll be two. There'll be what's called the lead counsel, and then the junior counsel. And the lead counsel will be usually in any murder trial a king's counsel, which is the sort of senior rank of barrister. So she went to a guy who had, I think he was based in Liverpool, in the north, Ben Myers Casey, and all the signs are that he's a capable lawyer, but I think he did perhaps miss some tricks in this.
So there's a trial, and it's in what year?
So it starts in the fall of 2022. It doesn't
fall of 2022.
Yeah, it doesn't finish till the middle of 2023. It's the longest criminal trial in English legal history.
Holy schmoly! So, wow, that's incredible. And that's another reason you would need an enormous team to deal with a trial just that long. So at the trial, she's formally been charged with what at the trial? What is she facing?
Initially, she'd been charged with 8 murders. On the eve of the trial, and we'll come back to this in the second part of this podcast because it's quite significant. One of the cases is reduced from murder to attempted murder because they decide that, or the prosecution has decided they can't make the murder charge on this on this 8th case stick because they're not sure the baby died as a result of what she was supposed to have done. So they reduced that to attempted murder. But essentially, when it comes to the jury, there are 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. Babies who she has supposedly attacked but who survived.
There's a criminal trial. The case presented against her is it based primarily on like Dowi Evans and these other medical people?
It's based on several things. So it's based on these notes that she'd written displaying, as I say, in my view, her mental anguish of what she was going through. And the fact that, she clearly had taken to heart when babies had died. I mean, it was held against her that she had...
Well, putting aside whatever she said, putting aside whatever her reaction was, what was the theory of how she killed these babies? I mean, I don't care what, how did she kill them? What was the case against her?
You see, I don't know if you agree, but in general, when serial killers strike, they tend to have one modus operandi. They have a way of killing people. We talked about Carlton Gary in a previous podcast, and
stocking
he was
strangler.
Exactly, he used women's stockings to strangle them, and the real stocking strangler did exactly that. But these babies are said to have died in a variety of ways. So, in some cases, it was alleged that Lucy Letby had deliberately injected them intravenously with air. In others, she was said to have put air down their feeding tubes, causing their stomachs to distend and their diaphragms to crack and put pressure on their breathing. In yet other cases, she was said to have injected babies with insulin, causing them to become hypoglycemic, to crash because their blood sugar was so low. So she was supposed to have used these different random methods, which were sort of, I think, chosen because arguably they could be made to fit the medical facts. But nobody ever saw her do anything. The closest you get to anybody saying, I saw Lucy Letby do something was in a case of a child called Baby K. Now, Baby K was a little girl born very, very premature at 25 weeks, very underweight, literally, I think 1.5 pounds. So she was having trouble breathing. And the doctor involved Ravi Jayaram, who became one of Letby's main accusers, told the court that he had seen Lucy Letby standing at the bottom of this baby's incubator cot while the alarm was going off, indicating that the baby was experiencing breathing difficulties and not doing anything. And I mean, that's it.
So a couple questions. I want to just dig into this a little deeper in terms of the evidence. What were the kind of the bombshell things that were presented against her in terms of her diaries of what she said? Like what was the anecdotal evidence of that?
Okay, so she had supposedly taken home copies of some of the medical notes of children who died. She had supposedly written journals which suggested, she had an unhealthy interest in them and their families. And the key one was, it was a post-it note, a sticky note, where, as I say, she'd written, I did this, I am evil. And then gone on to say that it was the police who had been trying to pressurize her into admitting this.
Did she testify in her own defense?
No, she did, yes.
What was her explanation of like the notes and the things in her journals and taking the records home?
It was very much what I've said, that she was very upset, she was dedicated, she cared about these kids. I mean, I've seen, subsequent to the trial, she was, on the anniversary of the death of one of the babies, she was talking to a friend on WhatsApp saying how upset she was. It was the year anniversary. She was thinking of this child. I mean, to me, this is, it's simple concern. This was held to be incriminating by the prosecution. But when she testified, the prosecution did something which I think was really quite underhand. So it was being alleged, as I say, that she had injected 2 babies with insulin. And basically, because they were relying on evidence from Dowi Evans and a couple of other experts, the prosecution got her to accept that these babies had been poisoned with insulin. Now, as we'll discuss a bit later, maybe in part 2, there are now grounds for doubting very strongly whether, in fact, they were ever poisoned with insulin. The reason that was being advanced as to why they had been poisoned with insulin does not stand up to close scrutiny at all. But because it was being accepted that they had been injected with insulin, she kind of accepted, okay, fine, they were. And then she was left saying, but it wasn't me. And there was another, really weird thing about this, which was that, according to the prosecution, it wasn't just like one bag that she had somehow put insulin into when they were on a drip. It was like she'd poisoned a whole batch, so that, even as the infusion of fluids continued, they were getting more and more insulin. So apparently she'd managed to get into the store cupboard and poison every bag of insulin, which, always seemed to me wildly improbable.
Wow. What did the defense put up was there anything notable in the defense besides her testimony denying all this?
Well,
did they have their own expert? Did they have their own medical testimony?
They did have their own expert. And tragically, they didn't call him as a witness. Now, they only had one.
What?
I know.
Wait. Did okay.
They didn't put him on the stand. They put her on the stand, which of course made her very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Especially given her fragile mental state after she, by this point, by the time her trial started, she spent 2 years behind bars being accused of a serial killer of babies. Imagine what it was like being in a woman's prison.
They did not call a medical expert?
No.
And the case against her presented, I assume, medical testimony on the injecting air feeding in the tubes, injected insulin, right?
They had a medical expert who had written detailed reports challenging the prosecution evidence on all these points, but they decided not to put him on the stand. And I just don't know why.
All right, that makes no sense. That to me is outrageous. You're not going to win. You're not going to win. You can't win. You can't win if you don't have any forensics. Let me give you a quick story. I actually represented some police officers that were accused. A woman actually confessed on videotape to strangling her 4-year-old son.
Right.
She somehow got her conviction vacated, and she claimed that the police made her confess, and that this boy, there were bunk beds, the elastic had broken off like the top like sheet, and it was dangling down. She said he was playing with his brother, and he accidentally got stuck, and he hung himself. Ooh. And she did not strangle him. Okay. Well, the first thing I do when I get the case is, and I always say this, I always start with the forensics. I got a forensic pathologist. He looked at all the records. He looked at the photos. He said, Andy, this kid's got a horizontal ligature. If he would have been accidentally hung himself, it would be a vertical ligature going up like a V. He said it's horizontal. It goes around most of the neck, but no pressure in the back, obviously, right? He's like, this kid was manually strangled. Okay.
Right.
I disclose him as an expert. He's like, this is a classic case of manual strangulation. It's kind of a no-brainer. Well, this is a civil case. Her team didn't have a medical expert. Didn't have anybody. Now, my belief is because they couldn't get anybody. They weren't going to get anybody to say that to refute what my forensic pathologist said. And once we had that forensic, advantage in the facts, I was confident we were going to win the case, which we did. So for poor Lucy Letby to not have any medical testimony refuting the nature of how these little kids died, these little babies, is astonishing.
I know.
Astonishing. And I don't know enough about the case to want to call it malpractice, okay? But I don't know how you cannot present, especially when the prosecution's case is based so much on forensics. You've got to come up with, this is your opportunity to say, these babies died through natural causes because the hospital fucked up, ladies and gentlemen. The people accusing her of doing wrong are the bad guys, and they're trying to cover their own tracks. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do if the facts permit it. But to not call a medical expert is unbelievable.
I know.
So the defense case is her testifying, and what else, if anything?
It's cross-examination of...
yeah, that's not going to cut it.
The prosecution experts, essentially.
Yeah,
the case Ben Myers, he landed some blows. He did it. He forced Dowi Evans, for example, to admit that he had changed his story about one of the babies, a baby known as baby C, because when he initially had decided that this baby was attacked, it had turned out that Lucy Letby was not in fact working that day. So he shifted his allegation to a following day, and the defense counsel brought that out, and that was clearly an effective point. But it didn't stop her being convicted.
Yeah, but you know what? In a trial that lasts 6 months, or how long was this?
Like
more than 6 months.
Yeah.
Those little nuggets of cross-examination get lost in the shuffle. It's a 6, 7, 8 month trial. Oh, you had a great little nugget of cross-examination today. Well, sorry, that's not going to hold up in such a long case.
It causes another huge problem because, so much doubt has emerged recently. But the trouble
we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though.
Yeah.
Just so I understand it, because I want to make sure I'm not ignoring some of the points. Is it the kind of situation where these 7 babies that died, let's just say they got pronounced dead. Let's say they all got pronounced dead at midnight, exactly at midnight. And oh my gosh, Lucy Letby had been in the room on the charts at 11:58 p.m. And in all the cases, she signed the charts just minutes before they died. Like, was there a time connection so close to their times of death that she was the only one or the last one to have been with these babies?
Not in most of the cases. No. The direct evidence was pretty much non-existent. They couldn't make that case because it didn't exist.
All right, so she has the trial. This is a long trial, and a lot of times this is just a general. How long did the jury deliberate? Do you know?
Quite a long time. I can give you the answer.
I'm glad you said that. No, I was just curious because it's a long trial, and so.
It was not short.
Okay. because there's a lot to talk about. And what is the jury? What is the jury's verdict?
Weeks, I think. Yeah.
What's the verdict?
The verdict was guilty on 7 attempted murders, 7 murders. I'm sorry. 6 attempted murders and 7 murders. And they couldn't agree about the case of baby K. They did find out not guilty of a couple of charges, but 2 or 3 charges, in fact. But the ones that matter, she's found guilty of 7 murders. In each and every one, she's sentenced to life without parole.
Sentenced to life without parole?
Yeah.
And at the time she's convicted, she's in her 30s?
Yeah, she's 32, I think. Yeah.
And this comes back. What year is the conviction come back?
It's in 2023.
2023. She's convicted, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Okay.
And she gets the same sentence for 6 attempted murders. The jury couldn't make up its mind about the case of baby K. So it was decided that she would have to have a new trial on baby K.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So we're gonna leave this episode right there. Lucy Letby's been convicted, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Oh my goodness. That's wow. Just wow. So we're gonna have a part 2. We're gonna have a part 2, everybody. Come back. We're gonna talk about what has happened since the trial. I look forward to continuing the conversation.